So we're continuing our discussion on new features in Ansible 2.4 and Ansible 2.5, and in particular we're talking about this new network CLI behavior. So just to reiterate what this is, it is basically Ansible pretending that connection equal local doesn't exist in order to get the core Ansible networking modules to behave more like the other modules in their system. So the general implication of this is that we can infer arguments directly from inventory and not have to provide a provider. And we saw one secondary consequence of this in that it was easier for us to specify a username and a password via the command line arguments. Now, one negative implication of this is there's going to be confusion between old modules, well, not old modules, between modules not in core. So for example, Napalm Ansible, which is provided by its own repository, that you're still going to need to set to connection local. Similarly with the NTC Ansible modules, you're going to need to set those with connection local. Additionally, at least for a certain amount of time, for things like eAPI and NXAPI, if you want to use those as in Ansible Core, you're going to still need to use a provider. I think in Ansible 2.6 they're working on that, but right now, if you want to use eAPI for Arista and NXAPI for Nexus, in Ansible 2.5 you would need to use a provider. Now for netconf, there is a special netconf connection type, which I'll show you in a few minutes, that you can use. So you wouldn't specify connection local for those. You would specify this connection netconf in the context of Junos or other netconf platforms. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at another use case here. So we used to have in Ansible 2.3.2.4, if you needed to use do enable, so if you needed to specify an enable password, you would basically do something like authorize and auth pass. And that's a little bit inconsistent with standard Ansible behavior. Standard Ansible behavior is expecting you to use this become argument and various different become underscore arguments. So let's look at a situation with that. So here I've changed my username to test9. Now test9 only logs me in at privilege level 1. So it doesn't log me in as privilege level 15. Password is exactly the same. Once again, I'm using network CLI and my network OS is iOS. If I look at my playbook, you'll see I'm actually doing a command, in this case show run, that's going to require privilege level 15. So if I go ahead and execute this in this case, we're going to see that this fails because we don't have the proper permissions for it to execute. So basically authentication failed, it couldn't execute show run. Basically it didn't have permissions. So now if we look at this Ansible host 1 file, you'll see that I've specified some additional arguments. I specified Ansible become, so I'm going to basically execute enable. My Ansible become method is enable, and my Ansible become password is this 88 new class. So this is basically telling the Ansible network CLI that you need to execute enable and that your enable secret is this. So it's making it more consistent with what you would have done with a lot of other Ansible modules. That with other modules, if you need to sudo, you would typically use Ansible underscore become. So let's see if this works properly if I use this Ansible host 1 file. So once again, we're making the behavior more consistent for operating between these networking modules and the other Ansible modules in this network CLI context.